The bright morning sun reflected off the polished brass doors of the Grand Palmer Hotel as a well-dressed man stepped out of his luxury car. He adjusted his custom-made Italian suit and checked his Rolex watch, right on time for his 10 a.m. meeting. His shoes clicked against the marble floor of the grand lobby, drawing quiet stares from guests and staff alike. He built his fortune from nothing, turning smart real estate investments into a billion-dollar empire. Today was supposed to be another routine business meeting, one of dozens he handled each month. But this day would turn out very different from what he expected. The front desk staff whispered among themselves as he approached. A young clerk looked nervously between him and her manager, who was quickly walking over with a forced smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Can I help you?" the manager asked, his voice carrying that special tone that somehow made a polite question sound like an accusation. "Yes, I have a meeting scheduled in your executive conference room," the businessman replied, pulling out his phone to show the confirmation email. "I'm here to meet with the Reynolds Group about their new development project." The manager barely glanced at the phone screen. "I'm afraid there must be some mistake. Our executive conference rooms are reserved for certain types of clients." He paused, looking the businessman up and down. "Perhaps you're looking for the Holiday Inn down the street." The businessman kept his voice steady, though his hand tightened slightly around his leather briefcase. "There's no mistake. I made this reservation myself last week. You can check your system." "Sir," the manager said, emphasizing the word in a way that made it sound anything but respectful, "this is a prestigious establishment. We have certain standards to maintain. I'm sure you understand." Several guests in the lobby had stopped to watch the scene unfold. Some looked uncomfortable, others seemed almost entertained, as if they were watching a show. The businessman noticed a couple quickly averting their eyes when he looked their way. "I don't understand, actually," he replied calmly. "Would you mind explaining exactly what standards I'm failing to meet?" He gestured to his impeccable appearance, the perfectly tailored suit, the designer watch, the handmade shoes. The manager's fake smile tightened. "Sir, if you don't leave voluntarily, I'll be forced to call security. We reserve the right to refuse service to anyone." The businessman looked around the lobby one more time, taking in every detail. The worn edges of the once luxurious carpets, the slight tarnish on the chandelier crystals, the outdated decor that spoke of a hotel living on past glory rather than current excellence. He noticed how some of the staff looked down in shame, while others seemed to share their manager's obvious prejudice. Instead of arguing further, he simply nodded. "Thank you for making things so clear," he said quietly. He turned and walked out, his head held high, ignoring the whispers that followed him. But as he reached his car, he didn't feel defeated. Instead, a plan was already forming in his mind. He pulled out his phone and called his assistant. "Cancel my meetings for the next 2 days," he said, "and get me everything you can find about the Grand Palmer Hotel. Ownership structure, financial records, recent lawsuits, everything." The hotel manager watched through the lobby windows as the luxury car pulled away, already forgetting about the incident and returning to his normal routine. He had no idea that this moment would come back to haunt him, or that the man he'd just turned away was about to change everything. This wasn't going to be a story about revenge. It would be something much bigger, something that would transform not just the hotel, but the entire city's hospitality industry. The real estate mogul smiled as he drove away. Sometimes the best deals came from the most unexpected places, and he had a feeling this was going to be one of his most satisfying projects yet. The businessman sat in his downtown office, staring at the wall of screens before him. Each displayed different information about the Grand Palmer Hotel: financial reports, customer reviews, employee turnover rates. His assistant had worked through the night gathering every detail they could find. What he saw painted an interesting picture. Behind the fancy facade and premium prices, the hotel was struggling. Guest satisfaction had been dropping steadily for the past 3 years. The reviews told a disturbing pattern, not just about poor service, but about selective treatment of guests. "Bring me the financial records from the last 5 years," he said to his assistant through the intercom. Within minutes, he was flipping through pages of numbers that told an even more compelling story. The hotel's occupancy rates were down, especially for their premium suites. High-end corporate clients were quietly taking their business elsewhere. He decided to dig deeper. Dressed in casual clothes, he spent the next day observing the hotel from the small coffee shop across the street. He watched as guests came and went, noting how the staff treated different people. Some guests were welcomed like royalty, while others faced subtle but clear discrimination. During his observation, he noticed something else interesting. A group of international business travelers had canceled their check-in after a tense conversation with the front desk. They walked out, pulling their suitcases behind them, heading to a competitor's hotel down the street. That single interaction probably cost the hotel thousands in lost revenue. "Sir," his assistant's voice came through his earpiece, "I found something interesting. The hotel's parent company has been trying to sell quietly. They're worried about bad publicity affecting the price." The businessman smiled, taking another sip of his coffee. This was exactly the kind of opportunity he looked for. A good business with bad management, ripe for transformation. He pulled out his notebook and started writing, his mind already racing with possibilities. He spent the rest of the afternoon making calls to his network of investors. Many had faced similar treatment in their own lives, and they immediately understood the potential in his plan. By evening, he had verbal commitments for more than enough funding to make a serious offer. The next morning, he put on his most casual clothes and went back to the hotel. This time, he sat in the lobby, pretending to read a newspaper while actually studying everything around him. He noticed the worn carpet edges that needed replacing, the slightly scratched furniture that should have been refinished months ago, the outdated computer systems at the front desk that caused unnecessary delays. But he also saw potential. The bones of the building were solid, the location was perfect, and despite everything, some of the staff still tried their best to provide good service to every guest. He watched one young bellhop go out of his way to help an elderly couple with their bags, treating them with genuine respect, regardless of their appearance. As the businessman observed, he made notes about which employees showed real hospitality and which ones followed the manager's discriminatory example. He was building not just a business plan, but a vision for transformation. His phone buzzed with a message from his legal team. They'd found a way to structure the deal through a holding company, keeping his identity hidden until the perfect moment. Everything was falling into place. Walking back to his car, he took one last look at the hotel's grand entrance. The sun was setting, casting a golden light on the building's historic facade. Soon, those doors would welcome everyone with equal respect, but first, he had to pull off one of the biggest deals of his career. He smiled to himself, knowing that the manager who turned him away had no idea what was coming. This wasn't just about buying a hotel. It was about changing the way people were treated, one luxury establishment at a time. The early morning light filtered through the blinds of the businessman's office as his team gathered around the large conference table. Stacks of documents revealed months of hidden problems at the Grand Palmer Hotel. His investigation had uncovered more than just poor management. It was a story of systematic discrimination, carefully hidden behind luxury and tradition. "Look at these numbers," his financial advisor pointed to a chart. "They're losing premium bookings every month. 5 major corporations have quietly moved their business conferences elsewhere in the past year alone." She flipped to another page. "And these customer compensation payouts, they're trying to buy silence instead of fixing the real problems." The businessman leaned back in his chair, taking in the information. His legal team had discovered something even more interesting, a pattern of settled complaints that never made it to the public eye. The hotel's parent company had been quietly paying people off, hoping to avoid bad publicity. "The staff situation is just as telling," his HR consultant added. "They've had 3 diversity hiring initiatives in the past 2 years, but somehow the management team hasn't changed at all. Qualified candidates keep getting rejected for vague reasons. As they dug deeper, they found reviews from former employees telling similar stories. Talented staff members had quit after being passed over for promotions, while others had been pushed out for speaking up against unfair treatment of guests. The businessman walked to the window, looking out at the city skyline. "What's the current market value of the hotel?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. "They're asking for $48 million, his financial advisor replied. "But given these issues and the declining revenue, we could probably get it for less. They're desperate to sell before these problems become public knowledge." He nodded, turning back to face his team. "Let's structure the deal through the holding company. I want everything done quietly, by the book. They won't know who's buying until it's too late to back out." His legal team went to work, creating a complex network of legitimate business entities to hide his involvement. Everything had to be perfect. One small mistake could tip off the current owners and ruin the plan. Later that day, he visited his old mentor, a retired hotel magnate who'd given him his first break in the business world. They sat in the mentor's home office, discussing the situation. "You know what I see in those reports?" the mentor asked, tapping the folder on his desk. "I see a golden opportunity. That hotel used to be the crown jewel of the city. With the right leadership, it could be again." The businessman smiled. "That's exactly what I was thinking. But I want to do more than just make it profitable. I want to make it a model for change." His mentor nodded approvingly. "The best revenge isn't just success. It's creating something better than what wronged you. Show them how it should be done." Returning to his office, the businessman found more interesting news waiting. His team had discovered that several current hotel employees had been secretly documenting the discrimination they witnessed. These honest workers had been keeping detailed records, hoping someone would eventually notice and make changes. He made a note of their names. These were exactly the kind of people he'd want to keep on staff after the takeover. People with integrity, who cared about doing the right thing even when nobody was watching. As the sun set over the city, he reviewed the final draft of the purchase offer. The number was fair but firm, low enough to reflect the hotel's problems, but high enough to be taken seriously. His team had crafted it carefully, making it almost impossible for the current owners to refuse. "Send it," he told his lawyer. "Let's see how they respond." That night, as he drove home, he passed by the hotel. Its windows glowed warmly in the darkness, but he knew that soon, that light would mean something different. It would become a beacon of true hospitality, where every guest would be treated with the respect they deserved. The game was on, and he was playing for keeps. The next move belonged to the hotel's owners, but he already knew how this would end. Sometimes the best way to fix a broken system was to buy it and rebuild it from the inside out. The businessman's offer hit the hotel owner's desk on a Tuesday morning. By afternoon, his phone was ringing. The parent company's CEO wanted to meet personally, a good sign that they were taking the offer seriously. They met in a private dining room at a neutral location, away from curious eyes and ears. The CEO, a gray-haired man in an expensive suit, tried to hide his desperation behind a practiced smile. But the businessman had been in too many negotiations to be fooled. "Your offer is interesting," the CEO began, stirring his coffee absently. "But frankly, it's lower than what we were hoping for. This is a historic property with a prestigious reputation." The businessman calmly pulled out a folder. "Let's talk about that reputation," he said, laying out page after page of evidence. "Your occupancy rates are down 30% for luxury suites. Corporate bookings have dropped by half. And these customer complaint settlements." He let the words hang in the air. The CEO's face tightened. Every hotel has its challenges. "True," the businessman agreed. "But not every hotel faces 3 potential class action lawsuits from former employees. My legal team found those cases very interesting." He wasn't bluffing. His investigators had uncovered several former workers who were preparing to go public with their stories. The color drained from the CEO's face. He reached for his water glass with a slightly shaking hand. "Those claims are unsubstantiated." "Maybe," the businessman replied. "But do you really want to test that in court? The media coverage alone would be unfortunate." He wasn't threatening, merely stating facts they both knew were true. The meeting continued for 2 hours. By the end, they had the outline of a deal. The CEO still didn't know who was really buying the hotel. The businessman's holding company provided excellent cover, but he was eager to sell before things got worse. Back in his office, the businessman gathered his team to plan the next steps. They had to move carefully. One wrong move could spoil everything. "We'll need to audit everything once we take over," his financial advisor said. "Every contract, every account, every supplier relationship. I bet we'll find more problems hiding in the books." His HR consultant nodded in agreement. "And we should start identifying key personnel right away. Some staff will need to go, but others deserve promotion. We've already spotted several employees who've been fighting against the discrimination from the inside." The businessman walked to his office window, watching the city lights come on as evening fell. He thought about his own journey, all the doors that had been closed in his face, all the times he'd been judged before he could even speak. This wasn't just about buying a hotel anymore. It was about proving that excellence and equality could go hand in hand. His phone buzzed. Another message from the CEO. They were ready to move forward with the deal. Everything was falling into place, perhaps even faster than he'd expected. That night, he drove past the hotel again, this time allowing himself to really imagine its future. He could already see the changes he'd make, not just to the building, but to its very culture. The worn carpets would be replaced, the tarnished fixtures restored, but more importantly, the spirit of the place would be transformed. He thought about the arrogant manager who turned him away, who still had no idea what was coming. Soon, very soon, that man would learn an important lesson about judging people by their appearance. His assistant texted him the final details for tomorrow's contract signing. In less than 24 hours, the deal would be done. The hotel's transformation could begin. And with it, a powerful message would be sent to the entire industry. As he parked his car at home, he smiled at the irony. The same hotel that had refused to let him through its doors would soon be his. But this wasn't about revenge. It was about creating something better, something that could show the world how things should be done. Tomorrow would be a big day. The contracts were ready. The money was in place. And soon, very soon, everyone would understand exactly who they'd underestimated. The signing ceremony took place in a quiet conference room downtown. Lawyers from both sides reviewed every page one final time as the businessman sat calmly, watching the clock tick toward his moment of triumph. The hotel's CEO kept glancing at him nervously, still unaware of who was really buying the property. "Everything appears to be in order," the lead lawyer announced, sliding the thick contract across the polished table. The businessman picked up his pen, the same one he'd used to sign his very first business deal years ago. It had become something of a lucky charm. "Just one final thing," the CEO said, wiping his forehead with a handkerchief. "We'd like to know more about your plans for the property. The Grand Palmer has a certain tradition to maintain." The businessman smiled slightly. "I assure you, we plan to restore the hotel to its true potential. Every guest will receive the treatment they deserve." The CEO missed the deeper meaning in those words, nodding with relief as the papers were signed. As soon as the signatures were dry, the businessman's team sprang into action. His legal department began the process of transferring ownership, while his operations team prepared for the takeover. Everything had to be handled perfectly. Timing would be crucial. Back in his office, he reviewed the transition plan with his staff. "Remember," he told them, "we keep my identity secret for now. I want to see how the current management operates when they think nobody's watching." His HR director shared the first round of findings from their staff interviews. Several employees had quietly documented years of discriminatory practices, hoping someone would eventually notice. These brave individuals would be first in line for promotions under the new ownership. That afternoon, he received an unexpected visit from an elderly man. one of the hotel's original bellhops who'd worked there for 40 years before retiring. The old man had heard about the sale and wanted to share his stories. That place used to welcome everyone, the former employee said, his eyes distant with memories. Movie stars, business leaders, politicians, didn't matter what they looked like or where they came from. If they could afford it, they were treated like royalty. Somewhere along the way, things changed. The businessman listened intently, taking notes. These stories would help shape his vision for the hotel's future. He wanted to restore not just the building, but the spirit of true hospitality it had once embodied. Later that evening, he walked through the hotel's grand lobby one more time, still anonymous, still treated with subtle disdain by the front desk staff. He noticed a young family being turned away with a flimsy excuse about no vacancies, despite the half-empty parking lot. His phone buzzed, a message from his team. The ownership transfer was complete. The hotel was officially his, but he wasn't ready to reveal himself just yet. First, he wanted to put a few things in place. He spent the next few hours in his office, finalizing the details of his plan. New policies were drafted, training programs designed, and renovation plans drawn up. Every change was carefully thought out to transform the hotel while honoring its historic character. His assistant brought in the latest financial reports. The hotel's current management had no idea how closely their every move was being watched. Every instance of discrimination, every turned-away guest, every unfair treatment was being documented. As night fell, he stood at his office window, looking out at the city lights. Tomorrow would bring the first subtle changes, small things the current management wouldn't notice at first. New booking policies would be implemented, ensuring rooms were available to all qualified guests. Maintenance requests that had been ignored would suddenly be approved. The arrogant manager who turned him away was still at his post, unaware that his days of discriminatory practices were numbered. Soon, very soon, he would learn an important lesson about judging people by their appearance. The businessman smiled as he gathered his things to head home. The real work would begin tomorrow, and he couldn't wait to show everyone what true luxury hospitality looked like when it welcomed everyone equally. The first week of secret ownership passed quietly. The businessman watched from behind the scenes as his team began making subtle changes. New booking software mysteriously appeared at the front desk, eliminating the selective availability that staff had used to turn away certain guests. Maintenance requests that had been ignored for months were suddenly approved and acted upon. In his temporary office across the street, he interviewed potential new staff members. One candidate's story particularly touched him. A former luxury hotel manager who'd quit her previous job after refusing to discriminate against guests. Her eyes lit up as he described his vision for the Grand Palmer's future. "I've worked in hotels for 20 years, she said, leaning forward in her chair. "I've always believed true luxury means treating everyone with respect. But so many places just don't get it." He nodded, making notes. She would be perfect for the new management team. Already, he had identified several other promising candidates. People who understood that excellence and equality went hand in hand. Meanwhile, the current hotel manager remained completely unaware of the changes brewing around him. He continued his usual practices, not realizing that every discriminatory action was being carefully documented. Security cameras captured his subtle sneers, his dismissive gestures, his selective enforcement of non-existent rules. One morning, the businessman watched through the lobby's security feed as a well-dressed couple was turned away. The manager claimed the hotel was fully booked, despite the reservation system showing dozens of empty rooms. Within minutes, the couple had posted about their experience on social media, adding to the growing collection of evidence. "Everything's ready for Phase 2, his operations director reported during their afternoon meeting. "We've identified the staff members who've been fighting against discrimination from the inside. They're all being lined up for promotions once we go public with the ownership change." The businessman reviewed the renovation plans spread across his desk. The hotel's grandeur would be restored, but with modern touches that reflected its new inclusive spirit. The old-fashioned dress code signs, tools of discrimination, would be replaced with simple, clear standards that applied equally to everyone. His phone buzzed with a message from the young bellhop he'd noticed during his earlier observations, the one who treated every guest with respect. The employee had been keeping a secret diary of incidents, hoping someone would eventually care enough to make changes. That kind of integrity would be rewarded in the new regime. Later that afternoon, he overheard two housekeepers talking in the service corridor. They were discussing the recent changes, wondering who was behind them. "Something's different," one said. "Have you noticed how all our supply requests are getting approved now? And the broken vacuum cleaners finally got replaced." The businessman smiled to himself. These small improvements were just the beginning. Soon, very soon, the hotel would undergo its complete transformation. That evening, he called a special meeting with his transition team. The time had come to prepare for the big reveal. They planned every detail carefully. Security would be present but discreet. Media representatives would be standing by. And most importantly, every discriminatory incident from the past month would be ready for review. "Tomorrow," he told his team, "we start the final phase. I want the reveal to be more than just a gotcha moment. This needs to be about positive change, about showing the industry a better way forward." As he drove home that night, he thought about his own journey. From being turned away at the door to becoming the owner, he'd never lost sight of his real goal. This wasn't about revenge. It was about transformation, about proving that luxury and equality could coexist beautifully. His phone lit up with one last message for the day. The current manager had just turned away another qualified guest. Little did that manager know, it would be one of his last acts of discrimination at the Grand Palmer Hotel. Tomorrow would change everything, and the businessman could hardly wait to see the look on the manager's face when the truth was finally revealed. The morning of the revelation dawned bright and clear. The businessman adjusted his perfectly tailored suit, the same one he'd worn when he was turned away from the hotel, and checked his appearance one last time. Today would change everything. He arrived at the hotel with his executive team, each carrying sleek briefcases filled with documentation of the past month's incidents. The lobby was busy with the usual morning rush of checkouts and new arrivals. At the front desk, the manager was in his typical form, subtly turning away a group of international business travelers with vague excuses about computer systems being down. The businessman watched this final act of discrimination with calm determination. Walking confidently toward the front desk, he could see the exact moment the manager recognized him, the slight widening of eyes, the reflexive step backward. "Sir," the manager said, his voice carrying that familiar condescending tone, "I believe I've already explained that our establishment has certain standards." "Yes," the businessman interrupted smoothly. "Let's talk about those standards." He opened his briefcase and pulled out a folder. "But first, I should introduce myself properly. I'm the new owner of the Grand Palmer Hotel." The silence that fell over the lobby was absolute. The manager's face went through a remarkable series of expressions: disbelief, shock, fear, and finally, a sickly attempt at a smile. "There must be some mistake," the manager stammered, his hands nervously adjusting his tie. "No mistake," the businessman replied, his voice carrying across the now silent lobby. "I've spent the last month observing how you run this hotel. Every turned-away guest, every discriminatory action, every false claim of being fully booked, it's all been documented." Hotel staff had stopped their work to watch. Many were hiding smiles, particularly those who had suffered under the current management's bias policies. The young bellhop who had always treated everyone with respect was grinning openly. "I've owned this hotel for exactly 1 month," the businessman continued, his voice clear and steady. "In that time, you've turned away 37 qualified guests using various excuses. You've denied promotions to 6 qualified staff members. You've selectively enforced policies that don't actually exist." The manager's face had gone pale. Behind him, the front desk staff exchanged knowing looks. They had witnessed these actions day after day, feeling powerless to stop them. But today, the businessman said, now addressing the entire lobby, all of that changes. The Grand Palmer Hotel is returning to its original mission, providing true luxury hospitality to all who can afford it, regardless of their appearance or background. He gestured to his executive team, who began distributing envelopes to certain staff members. Those of you who have maintained your integrity, who have treated every guest with respect despite pressure to do otherwise. You're being promoted, effective immediately. The young bellhop opened his envelope with trembling hands, his eyes widening at the contents. Similar scenes played out across the lobby as other deserving staff members received recognition for their integrity. As for you, the businessman turned back to the manager. Your services are no longer required. My team will escort you to clear out your office. Security personnel appeared quietly, ready to ensure a smooth transition. The manager looked around desperately, but found no sympathy. Too many people had witnessed his actions, had been hurt by his policies. You can't do this, the manager protested weakly. I've run this hotel for years. You've run it into the ground, the businessman corrected him. But more importantly, you've betrayed the very essence of hospitality. That ends today. As the manager was escorted away, the businessman turned to address the gathered staff and guests. Starting now, the Grand Palmer Hotel welcomes everyone who can afford our rates. True luxury isn't about excluding people. It's about providing exceptional service to all our guests. The lobby erupted in applause. Staff members who had kept quiet for years were suddenly sharing their stories. Guests who had witnessed the scene were already posting on social media, spreading the word about the hotel's transformation. It wasn't just about one manager being removed. It was about changing an entire culture. The businessman smiled, knowing that this was just the beginning of the hotel's new chapter. In the weeks following the dramatic revelation, the Grand Palmer Hotel underwent a remarkable transformation. The businessman had moved his office into the hotel, personally overseeing every change. Each morning, he walked through the lobby, greeting staff members by name and stopping to chat with guests. The renovation crews worked efficiently, updating the hotel's tired features while preserving its historic charm. Fresh paint brightened the walls, new carpets added warmth to the corridors, and modern technology was seamlessly integrated into the classic decor. But the most significant changes weren't physical, they were in the hotel's spirit. One morning, a guest who had been turned away months ago returned, unsure what to expect. The newly promoted front desk supervisor, who had once been a junior clerk afraid to speak up, welcomed her warmly. "We've been hoping you'd give us another chance," she said, upgrading the guest to a suite at no extra charge. The businessman watched this interaction from across the lobby, smiling. These were the moments that made everything worthwhile. The guest's surprised delight, the staff members' genuine warmth. This was what true hospitality looked like. During the daily staff meeting, the new management team shared the latest guest satisfaction scores. They had skyrocketed. Reviews praised not just the renovated facilities, but the inclusive atmosphere and exceptional service. Corporate bookings were flooding in, with many companies specifically mentioning the hotel's new reputation for treating all guests with equal respect. "Our occupancy rates are up 40% from last month," the revenue manager reported excitedly. "And we're seeing a more diverse mix of guests than ever before. Turns out treating everyone with respect is good for business." The businessman nodded, remembering his own experience of being turned away. "Success isn't just about luxury amenities," he told his team. "It's about making every guest feel valued." Later that day, he interviewed potential candidates for the remaining staff positions. One applicant shared a story that particularly moved him. She had worked at another luxury hotel where she was passed over for promotion despite her qualifications. "I want to work somewhere that judges people by their abilities, not their appearance," she said. She was hired on the spot. The hotel's new training program became a model for the industry. Every employee, from housekeepers to executives, learned about unconscious bias and the importance of consistent, respectful service. The businessman often participated in these sessions, sharing his own experiences to help staff understand different perspectives. One afternoon, a group of international business leaders arrived for a conference. They had heard about the hotel's transformation and wanted to see it for themselves. The businessman gave them a personal tour, showing how excellence and equality could work together perfectly. "This is remarkable," one visitor commented, watching the diverse mix of guests and staff interacting in the lobby. "You've created something special here." The businessman's phone buzzed with a message. Another luxury hotel chain wanted to learn about his management approach. Word was spreading through the industry. The Grand Palmer was becoming known not just as a great hotel, but as a pioneer of change. That evening, he stood in the restored ballroom, watching guests mingle at a charity gala. The room sparkled with renewed elegance, but more importantly, the crowd reflected the true diversity of the city's elite. Everyone who could afford to be there was welcome, just as it should have been all along. A young staff member approached him with a question about handling a special request from a guest. The businessman listened carefully, then smiled. "Remember our new motto," he said. "Luxury is about making everyone feel special." As he walked through the hotel that night, checking that everything was running smoothly, he reflected on how far they'd come. The old manager's discriminatory policies were now just a bad memory. In their place was a new culture of genuine hospitality, where every guest was treated like royalty. The hotel's transformation was proving what he had always believed, that success comes not from excluding people, but from welcoming them. Each day brought new confirmation that doing the right thing was also the smart thing. 1 year after taking ownership of the Grand Palmer Hotel, the businessman stood on the grand staircase, surveying the packed ballroom below. The hotel was hosting its anniversary gala, celebrating not just a year of record profits, but a complete transformation in culture and reputation. The guest list read like a who's who of the business world. CEOs, celebrities, and community leaders had all come to be part of this historic evening. Many of them had personal stories about the hotel's transformation. Some had been turned away in the past, only to return and find a completely different welcome under the new ownership. The young bellhop who'd shown such integrity during the old regime was now the head of guest services, wearing his new position with pride. He had just finished telling a group of industry journalists about the changes he'd witnessed. "It's like working at a completely different hotel," he said, beaming. "Now we get to show what real hospitality means." Near the refreshment table, the businessman spotted a familiar face, the international businessman who had been turned away the same day he had made his purchase offer. Now he was a regular guest, bringing his corporate events to the hotel. "I tell everyone this story," he was saying to a group of listeners. "It's about more than just a hotel. It's about changing the way business is done." The new front desk supervisor, who had risen from her junior position, approached with the latest numbers. The hotel's revenue had tripled. More importantly, their guest satisfaction scores were the highest in the city. "We had a full house last week," she reported proudly. Every room filled with guests from all over the world. As the evening progressed, the businessman took to the podium to address the crowd. The room fell silent, everyone eager to hear from the man who had transformed not just a hotel, but an industry's expectations. "1 year ago," he began, "I stood in this lobby and was judged not by my ability to pay, not by my character, but by appearances. Today, we celebrate not just our success, but the proof that excellence and equality go hand in hand." He gestured to his team, standing proudly at their tables. "These incredible people have shown that true luxury isn't about excluding others. It's about making everyone feel special. Our success proves that doing the right thing is also good business." The crowd erupted in applause. Among them was the city's tourism director, who announced that the Grand Palmer would receive an award for outstanding contribution to the city's hospitality industry. "This hotel has set a new standard," she declared. "Others are following your lead." Indeed, 3 other luxury hotels in the city had already changed their policies, inspired by the Grand Palmer's success. The businessman had been invited to speak at international hospitality conferences, sharing his vision of inclusive luxury. Later that evening, as the celebration continued, a young couple approached him. "We were turned away from here last year," the woman said, "but we came back after hearing about the changes. Our wedding reception is booked for next month. We wanted to be part of the new Grand Palmer story." The businessman smiled, remembering his own journey from rejected guest to owner. He watched as his diverse staff moved efficiently through the crowd, providing impeccable service to every guest. The hotel's historic chandeliers sparkled above, casting a warm glow over a scene that would have been impossible a year ago. As the gala drew to a close, he walked through the lobby one last time that evening. The same marble floors that had once echoed with discrimination now rang with the sounds of genuine welcome. The guest book was filled with names from around the world, each person treated with equal respect and dignity. Looking out over the city lights through the grand windows, he felt a deep satisfaction. The hotel hadn't just survived its transformation, it had thrived. Its success stood as a shining example that luxury and equality weren't just compatible, they were inseparable. This was more than just a business victory. It was proof that one person's refusal to accept discrimination could spark real change. The Grand Palmer Hotel had become more than just a place to stay. It was a symbol of what was possible when excellence met equality.